Welcome back to Mom in Mind. I'm your host, Dr. Kat. And on this episode, I am joined by Jessie Harold. And today we are going to dive into matrescence, talk about what that is, what that can look like for people, how that impacts people, and explore what it is to become a mother, what that transition is. Jessie Harold is a coach and doula who's been supporting women through radical life transformations and other rites of passage for over 15 years. She works one-on-one with women and mothers and facilitates mentorship programs, women's circles and rituals, and hosts retreats and nature-based experiences. She is the author of Mothershift, Reclaiming Motherhood as a Rite of Passage, and Project Body Love, My Quest to Love My Body and the Surprising Truth I Found Instead. She's also the host of the Becoming podcast. We are going to get into a lot of great stuff today, and I'm so glad you're here. So let's dive in and meet Jessie. Welcome, Jessie. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a real joy.
I'm glad we're here and we're going to talk about matrescence and we're going to talk about your book and we're going to talk about your view and understanding of how matrescence and this process unfolds. I think a lot of people are really interested in this topic. I know they are, and it's not talked about enough, so I'm glad you are here to talk about it and have a book for people to really deep dive. But let's talk about it. What is matrescence?
Yeah, so matrescence is the transition to motherhood in short. And the word matrescence was first coined by a social anthropologist named Dr. Dana Raphael back in 1975. She also coined the term doula, which I love about her. And matrescence, she said at time, matrescence is the time of mother becoming, and that it needed more study. And then that whole concept, like so many things in motherhood and womanhood, went under the radar and disappeared from the academic scholarship for quite some time. And we're seeing a resurgence of the word now in our popular media. People are using it more and more. And matrescence refers to the biological, psychological, social, economic, sometimes spiritual shifts that a person goes through when they enter into motherhood. And I posit that process actually takes 2 to 3 years to complete. We often talk about 6 weeks postpartum. We talk about the fourth trimester now, thankfully, but there's more, right? And so that's my Coles Notes definition of what matrescence is and what we're looking at here.
So, yeah, people hearing 2 to 3 years might have some questions about what's happening during that time and what does that mean. And just as just a point of reference, we're talking about a phase of time, like a period of time. And people often refer to like adolescence. That adolescence is a long time.
Yeah.
And we give a lot of space for people to be in their transitions in all of the ways that they are, but not as much for mothers and people coming into their motherhood. It's like what you're supposed to just, all those ideas about you're just supposed to just know all of a sudden everything. That does a real disservice. So I love that you're talking about that it's a process and that it takes time. And so what's happening in those 2 to 3 years?
Yeah, there's a lot, right? And it varies for everyone. And in matrescence, we go through matrescence with every child we have too. So that can shape and make our experiences different. And you're right that the comparison between adolescence and matrescence is such a rich one because we expect that adolescence takes a long time. We expect that it's uncomfortable, actually. As adults, we chuckle and it's this awkward, uncomfortable time. And we also anticipate that when a person goes through adolescence, they come out the other side more mature. They're like ready to, they know who they are. They become more of who they are, maybe. They're prepared to contribute to society in a different way. And we never talk about an adolescence bouncing back. Like we actually think that's bad
Mm.
if our young adult starts acting like a child again, right? Whereas with matrescence, we have this, you're right, this rhetoric around bouncing back or not losing yourself in motherhood, not changing in motherhood, not letting it change you. Yeah, so some really
No
interesting
pressure.
things here, right? Yeah, and I think that what we forget is that matrescence also is a developmental process
Mhm.
and that it has the potential to do the same things to make us more of who we are, to
Mhm.
grow us up, to grow us into deeper maturity. And in my work, I intersect the kind of world of matrescence with adult development psychology and
Mm.
in a number of different ways of thinking about how we grow up as adults and how we hit
Mm.
milestones, just like our kids do. And some of those milestones are ones that I see mothers skyrocketing through in matrescence. It's things like being able to hold paradox and complexity. It's
Mm.
interdependence and having that sort of sense of not just being an autonomous human being anymore, but actually being in an interdependent and relational kind of ecosystem with this
Mhm.
child, children of yours. There's
Mhm.
so many things that we have the potential to develop in matrescence and how much we can grow. It's really, it can be a process filled with power and potential. And also, it's hard,
Yeah.
particularly in this culture that
Mhm.
makes becoming a mother so very challenging. And we're talking more and more about what matrescence is, and we're using the word more and more. We've got some basic awareness. And the thing that we're not talking about as much, or that's really emerging in this field, is how we traverse matrescence, like what happens along the way. So that's getting to your question
Yeah.
around how does this unfold? This was the question I was asking a decade ago when
Mhm.
I first started doing some of this work. And I'd gone through my own matrescence, was
Mhm.
about to go through my second, and I
Mhm.
was witnessing this process unfold for the clients I was working with. And I went to the research because I assumed that somebody must have studied this already and that I could borrow a framework or some kind of understanding from literature and use this to support my clients. And I found that actually the vast majority of adult development literature, rite of passage theory, some of the things that I might draw upon to understand the transition of matrescence was really like it didn't speak to the experience my clients were having. It was oftentimes created by, for, and about a lot of old white guys, honestly. And so some
Okay.
of this literature was
Yeah.
like not applicable to what my clients were going through. And so I started to create some of my own research and evidence around this. And so I came up with this kind of model that I use to support folks through matrescence. And I call it the four elements of radical transformation. It uses the elements of earth, water, air, and fire to describe these phases.
Mm.
I think of them as like trail markers. So if you're hiking along a trail and
Mhm.
maybe you think you're lost and you're not
Mhm.
sure, and then all of a sudden it's right in that moment, right, that you look up and see a trail marker and you're like,
Right.
okay, cool. I'm
Right.
on the path. Here's something that can orient me
Mm.
and I can keep going. So
Right.
that's the backstory behind that.
That's great. So, yeah, thank you for giving some of the history, especially the framework and where it started. I was thinking when you said that the word was formed or the idea was formed and then it went away for a little bit and it came back, but it's come back and getting to a point where we're really a lot more people are aware and interested and want to know and want this information because it gives them a foundation. It helps, like you said, those like trail markers. It helps ground people to know that they're just not like floating off in space trying to figure this motherhood thing out, that there are some themes and some things that are, whether or not they're completely universal, they're at least applicable in some ways. So I'm really interested to hear more about those kind of trail markers and how you think through that.
Yeah, totally. So the first element is Earth. And Earth is a time of really getting your bearings and maybe literally but definitely metaphorically getting your toes in the earth. That's true for you right now. Because in matrescence, it's not just about becoming a mother and maybe learning some new skills. Like we often think of our transition into motherhood as being a behavioral one where we're doing different things,
Uh-huh.
but actually it's a shift to who we are, right? And it's a shift to all of those areas of life that I mentioned, like to your body,
Mm.
to the way you identify in the world. Maybe you feel differently about your career. Probably your intimate partnership, if you have one, is looking a
Mm-hmm.
little different these days.
Right.
Your friendships, your community, like you name it, right?
Yep.
We're ecosystems.
Mm.
And so when one thing changes, baby comes into the mix, or baby number two or three or four comes into the mix, then there's this ripple effect out to the rest of our life.
Mm-hmm.
And all of these things change. And that can feel so overwhelming. Everything has changed, like the rug has been pulled out from underneath you. And I
Yeah.
think like the simple first step is to name the change, is to orient yourself to what's true now, is to literally maybe even grab a journal and write down, okay, my partnership feels different. I don't want to go back to work or whatever, you name
Right.
it,
Yep.
and get real with it. And that kind of gives you a starting place. The next element is water. And this is a piece that I think is really overlooked in this process of becoming a mother. Water is the watery work, often involving tears and the washing away of things that are no longer, right? This grief work, actually, because
Yes.
any transformation in our lives, whether it's unwanted or deeply wanted, requires us to give up who we used to be before that.
Mm-hmm.
And that can sound really scary. And I think part of the reason it's really scary is because we, as a culture, generally as a Western culture, don't really have the skills to grieve. We don't have
Right.
the language around it. We feel we don't have the permission to grieve anything other than the death of someone. But if we're thinking about it in that term,
Mm-hmm.
this is the death of someone. This is the death of a pre-motherhood self or the death of a self that you were before having this
Mm-hmm.
particular child. And again, sounds really scary. We forget that on the other side of that, you do get to step into all of these parts of yourself that you may have, that you may yet discover. And it's not to say, I always like to say that to bring in the concept of ambiguous loss here, and ambiguous
Mm-hmm.
loss is this
Mm-hmm.
concept of, it was originally coined to talk about people who had lost loved ones in combat or whose loved ones had gone MIA. And they didn't know, those family members didn't know if they were lost forever, if they were dead, or if they were hoping against hope that they would return. That's how it often feels in this
Yep.
time. Will I go on 10K runs again?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Not right now. Am
Mm-hmm.
I hoping against hope that will return to me, or is that part of me gone? And so it's a tough time. It's really challenging. And it's notable if we have some skills to be with that grief. And I think, as with that earth element, often the first work of water is naming the grief, naming what's present, giving ourselves permission to feel sadness or
Yeah.
ambivalence. Anger often comes up in there. None of this, I'm normalizing it here as a normal part of the transition to motherhood. And it doesn't mean don't get help. And it
It's
doesn't
great to
mean
hold
that
both. Yep.
it totally, it doesn't mean that we might not explore if this is verging into the territory of postpartum mood disorder. But also, I think there's a Venn diagram where those two experiences
Don't
totally overlap, right?
for sure.
Yeah.
Yep. Right. Especially with what you idea or the truth that this transition takes time. This, even with grief, there's this idea that you should, okay, fine, that you should be over it by now. You should be through
Yeah.
this by now. And that kind of pressure also adds to the potential of
Yeah.
feeling depressed and anxious or becoming like a clinical diagnosis. If you're in a process, even if it's a really like normal process and you're being told you shouldn't be in it, that's inherently going to start to make you feel shame. Uh,
Totally.
and
Yeah.
then where are you? Just naming that this could take a minute or two or a lot is already taking pressure off. and allowing people to know that this is a grief process and not one that you have to just be done with right away does so much to reduce the pressure.
Yeah, definitely. I think you're totally right about that. And I think it is important to normalize some of that and validate it and help mothers to know that they're not, I always say you're not broken, you're becoming. Like this is part of it.
That's beautiful. I love that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Bumper sticker on shirt.
Yeah.
That's great.
Totally. Yeah. 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 So the next phase is air.
Mhm.
And this is the liminal space. So this in between time. So maybe you've had a baby, you got a baby in your house, but you haven't like fully stepped into this and integrated this identity of mother, for
Mm.
example. So you're in this like betwixt in between
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
It can last a long time, like maybe
Hmm.
even a lot of this 2 to 3 year time span that we're talking about. And it's a really uncomfortable thing because we live in a culture that really gives us a lot of gold stars for knowing who you are, where you're headed, what you're up to. Like hopefully you're on a
Oh my
like
gosh.
upward trajectory to something. You've got
Always. Yeah.
goals, you've
Oh,
got right timelines.
I'm tired
All of
just
that
thinking
is
about it.
the
Yeah.
I know. All that is like the opposite of what it means to be in liminal space. So like the pressure is real, right? The
Hmm.
pressure is real to get out of here. And I think both in the water phase and the air phase, people either try to recreate the circumstances of their pre-babyhood lives
Right.
and right and often suffer as a result because it's just trying to fit a square peg into a round
Hmm.
hole kind of
Hmm.
thing, right? Challenging. Or they try to push through to the new normal, whatever that might look like. And I think that we, in doing that, may bypass some of what's really juicy and important about the liminal time. I always talk
Mm.
about micro liminal moments in our day, like when you're on a walk or in the shower or something. We always talk about those being actually paradoxically creative times and like
Mm.
oddly productive. You think of your
Yes.
best
Yes.
ideas. And this is what happens in the liminal space. If we're able to hold here in this discomfort, this is where we get to explore who we're becoming and experiment a little bit and try parts of ourselves or new aspects of our identity on for size and
Hmm.
see how they fit.
Right.
And it can be this wildly creative time. This is where I see mothers starting businesses or
Right.
writing books again or whatever
Hmm.
it is,
Hmm.
writing
Hmm.
poetry. And so it has lots of potential there if we're able to kind of hold in the discomfort. And then the final element is fire. And that is the time when we're really igniting that kind of ember that is growing in you, and you're starting to feel like gravitationally pulled towards who you're becoming now and starting to feel more integrated in that identity of mother or mother of more than one, if
Hmm.
that's the
Hmm.
phase, the matrescence that you're in. And it's a sexy and exciting time, right? Because we get again lots of those gold stars for emerging from the proverbial cocoon
Yeah.
and so we won't bypass to this time, but the kind of the process of going through these phases of matrescence can be so powerful,
Right.
really filled with a lot of potential and power. Yeah.
Yeah. There's so many parts of what you described as I was just associating with different people that I met with throughout the years. In particular, that idea of trying to fit yourself back into sort of what you were before and how stressful that can be because you have changed. And that can be a hard thing to understand, wrap your head around, be okay with. But it also doesn't mean there's not parts of yourself that are still the same or similar as they were before. You're just in that integrative phase of trying to figure out like what's new ish and what still carries forward. And you might even, I remember the day I brought my daughter home from the hospital. We were driving home and I was just like looking around and I was like, the world is different now. It just
Mhm.
is. It's not like anything really actually changed in the world, but my world was different. And that took a long time to like really sink in and be okay with. Not that I wasn't okay with it, but it's just an adjustment, a huge adjustment. So, anyways, like being able to hold all of these things gently at the same time as you're moving through this is a lot of what I hear, what you're describing.
Yeah, definitely. There's this, you're right, we might let go of some things, we might carry some things through. The other part of letting go is that I see this happen all the time with mothers, is that we get pretty clear on our priorities. As confusing as this time can
Uh
be,
huh. Yeah. Yeah.
and so it's also like a big permission slip to let go of the things that aren't serving you anymore, right? And I
Totally.
do
Oh,
see
yeah.
mothers like unfollow, unfriend, unhook from, and
Pruning
so there
is,
is, you're right, totally. And when we're well guided through it, so I think matrescence can be a time where we can really get pulled into some of those really toxic, kind of insidious norms around
mm,
motherhood, around the good mother, the perfect mother.
yes. Yes. Yes.
Dangerous time because you're so unsure of yourself and everything is so up in the air. It makes a lot of sense to want to kind of glom onto some certainty about how you should do things or
Yes.
be in a community of other people who are all doing it the quote unquote right way. So that's
Yep.
true. And also when we're all supported through this time and we have people like you and me saying,
Yep.
hey, let's lift the veil on some of these aspects of motherhood. It gives us the opportunity to decide for ourselves what this means for us and what kind of mother we want to be and really choose our own path.
Absolutely. And that's so empowering in that
Yeah.
frame of reference. And especially when you're feeling so vulnerable in the change, like just that framework is helpful.
Yeah.
You're not lost, you're just figuring it out.
Totally. Yeah.
It's a great framework. With this framework, like what are you hearing from people as like a response to it for people who are going through it? How has it been supportive for them?
Yeah, I think what it offers, it is that trail marker effect, right? That idea of feeling a little less lost, having the process feel a little bit less nebulous. And what I offer in the book and in the work that I do with clients is some pretty specific and tangible tools and practices that we can use at every step along the way. So it feels, even when you're in liminal space, for example, where it feels like you're just waiting to feel more like a mother, that there are things you can do in that time to support yourself.
Mm,
And so that's it. It's both profoundly orienting, compassionate,
yeah.
and so many mothers just feel less alone. It's very permission giving. It's like
Yes.
you can take your time. It's normal to feel sad. It's normal to feel like you don't know who you are anymore. This is all part of it.
Yeah. So that takes pressure off. It does the normalizing, it does the validating, it does all of those things we really need as a pushback against it's the truth. Like all of these things are validated, and yes, we should be self compassionate, but we're in some ways we step out into the world kind of swimming upstream against these ideas of what we're supposed to be and how we're supposed to be. And if we don't have a safe place where we can, like, okay, wait a minute, I'm in a process. This is okay. I don't need to be
Yeah.
in a race against anybody. I don't need to have snapped back or whatever, all that BS. People need that soft place to land and to remember that they're in a process.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just too much pressure out there
Yeah. Totally.
at the end of the day. And that's why this is so important is to give people a framework that they can hold on to. It's like it's way more than a life raft, but at minimum, it's that something that they can hold on to know that okay, I'm not going to be lost in all of this.
Yeah. Totally. Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's important to say I've used the phrase like losing yourself in motherhood a couple of times. And we do have this kind of rhetoric that's the worst thing that could happen when you become a mother. And it's because it's scary, because we don't have a lot of grief literacy. And I want to name that there are wider systemic factors that force our hands on that one. If you're forced to go back to work while you're literally still bleeding from birth.
Mm-hmm.
Chances are you're going to feel a little lost in motherhood if you
Right.
are scrambling to find affordable childcare, if you don't have maternity leave, like all of these
Yeah.
things. We live in a culture that where it's easy to lose yourself in motherhood, not least of which is also those sort of norms and kind of that ideals of the perfect mother that kind of pull us away from ourselves. So there's that is true. And also it's an age-old truth that kind of predates this particular time in our culture that says that to become someone new, to step into a new identity, you have to let go of the old. So there's two things going on there, and I want to name
Interesting.
that we still very much need
Yep.
to work to improve the conditions under which we're mothering, and losing yourself in motherhood is still part of the process.
Those are amazing points. Right. I think that stuff just gets internalized, all of these supposed tos
Yeah.
and how things are they're supposed to work, that it's really hard to step back and take a look at it or even question it and be like, was that even what I want to do? Is that even what actually is happening? Is that even what works for me? And the title of your book in particular, like the reclaiming of motherhood as a rite of passage, is really important because it gives it that the I keep saying framework, but it gives it the framework where you can mark time, mark that time as a growth period, but not growth in this way that is the pressure of, oh, you always have to be getting better, like you were saying.
Yeah.
Like it doesn't have to mean bigger, better, stronger, all this other stuff. It can just mean what it is for you.
Yeah. Good point. Because I would hate for people listening to this to hear these kind of ideas that I'm presenting around motherhood and that a developmental process is something that helps us learn, grow, and develop and maybe become more of ourselves. I would hate for people to contort that into this is another thing I have to do. This
Right,
is another
right.
expectation, that, and I don't think that's, I don't think that's it. But I
Yeah,
just
no.
want to name that too, right? This isn't like some mandatory path towards self-actualization.
Yep.
And I think, and nor does it have to be pretty. And I think that's right, part of it as well. There's this interesting paradox where the transition to motherhood is hard in many ways. And in our particular culture, it's even harder. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure that we would be galvanized in this process and go through this. It's almost like these fires of the initiatory process if it weren't for the challenges. As much as we want to make things easier for mothers, also that's part of it. Like I think some of these challenges that we face are part of it, but
Mm-hmm.
we need the tools to feel resourced as we're traversing them.
Absolutely. And this book is one of those tools. It's breaking it down for people to have something to hold on to is just so important. If you don't understand or have some sense of what's going on for yourself, it's just so disorienting. And we again, like going back to us, there are other cultures that have more culturally deep or bound processes or sometimes literal rites of passage that mark this kind of a time, but we don't as much. So it's nice to have this to hold on to. Your book.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. The other kind of part of the book, the other kind of half of the book is about something I call the mother powers. And the mother powers are these skills and capacities that we have the potential to cultivate and grow in our motherhood. And they're the things that help us get through matrescence. So there's this sort of individual thing about it, but it's also, they're tremendously counterculture. I really hold that matrescence and motherhood generally is pretty counterculture. And these are skills and capacities that our world really needs right now.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
they're things like community building and creativity and inner knowing
Mm-hmm.
and tending to your own needs, ritual, embodiment, earth connection. There's seven of them. So there are these things that often motherhood hands us on a silver platter.
Mhm.
Sometimes it's just that our matrescence time offers this like potential that we can nudge towards. Something like creativity, I think, is something that like just really blossoms for a lot of mothers. It's so
Mhm.
paradoxical because we've never had less time or
Right.
energy. And
You're right.
somehow, am I picking up what you're, yeah,
Totally.
but
I'm like,
it's
oh,
it's
I
such a
identify with that.
it's such a
Hmm.
funny thing. I think creativity blossoms with constraint, right? Like with some
Hmm.
kind of constraint of time, topic, or energy.
Yep.
And so I think that's often what happens. And sometimes even just naming that is enough of a permission slip for a mother to be like, yeah, actually, I want to, whatever, pick up my brushes again. Or
Hmm.
by definition, we're creating the kind of life and world that we want our children to grow up in. So there's like all of these kind of just beautiful potentials that exist. And that's the other part of the book is really exploring all of those for yourself and also mobilizing those in the direction of a better world.
That's so hopeful. Just both like for on an individual level and a collective level. I mean that it doesn't all have to be a slog and that this is yeah, yes, it's challenging and difficult and there are those things, but man, there's some beauty that comes out of it. I would not be doing what I'm doing right now if it weren't for what I'd gone through. Period.
Yeah.
It's and that speaking to that's why I was resonating with it so hard, that like creative stuff. I remember actually I was probably I don't know, my daughter was months old and I woke up straight out of sleep one night and I had this idea for a book and I wrote down like chapter by I couldn't I had to capture it in that moment and that's nothing that has ever happened to me before. So you're just in this you're making me think about it right now and it's just like this energy and push to do something different or good or help other people how difficult this time whatever I love that as part of what you have in the book because it also gives people hopeful things to hold on to and ways to frame this like whatever they're feeling and whatever they're experiencing and these new I love that you call them powers. It's great.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
cool. Thanks for that memory.
That's
you
awesome.
you jogged my brain.
I love it.
It's
That's
really
totally
cool.
where I started writing again too, like in the
Really
middle of the night with my first child. Yeah.
amazing. What a trip. Yeah, there's
Uh-huh.
something happening there that is, I'm so glad you're capturing in your book. And I also want to say you're already working on a second book that is, I think, more story based.
This one, so it's an edited anthology called Mother Becoming. And so I've invited, yeah, scholars, poets, and everyone in between to contribute to this book. Just trying to, again, deepen and maybe make richer our
Mhm.
understanding of matrescence. And so it actually is this total hybrid. We've got some academic papers, some like original research,
Oh,
and
cool.
poetry, and literally everything in between.
That's
It's
awesome.
brilliant. Yeah, it's being published with Demeter Press, working on it right now, and I'm really excited about it. It's the word that keeps coming to my mind is kaleidoscopic, like the
That's great.
perspectives
Hmm.
on matrescence and all of the different ways we've got authors writing about matrescence and disability, matrescence from different ethnic and cultural frameworks,
Hmm.
matrescence and creativity, like all of these things. And then the whole second half of the book focuses it's for practitioners and providers and how can we like mobilize. It's everything from how can we hold more effective matrescence circles to how might we inform policy. Yeah, it's really
Nice.
exciting.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that sounds chock full of great stuff.
It's so chock full. Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
awesome. That's so good.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to say that I'm really grateful that you've come on today. I'm energized by our conversation and the work that you're doing. I think it's awesome and needed. And thanks for sharing with us.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been a great conversation. I appreciate it. And I really appreciate the work you're doing in the world. Thank you so much for that. You're just touching so many mothers' lives. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks so much. It was great to talk with you.
Yeah, you too.
Please get connected with Jessie at jessieharold.com, on Instagram at jessie.es.harold. Check out her books and podcast. All of those will be connected in the show notes. If you haven't yet subscribed or followed the Mom and Mind podcast wherever you listen or on YouTube, please do that so you can get all of these episodes downloaded directly to you. Thank you so much for being here. Until next time.